Fine Gael and Labour are telling voters that they will renegotiate the €85 billion IMF EU bailout deal. But are the parties raising false hopes? European Central Bank Chief Jean-Claude Trichet has dampened down any expectation that there would be a change to the bailout terms. He said it was absolutely essential for our credibility that Ireland sticks to the plan. Well, with us now, Fine Gael finance spokesman Michael Noonan. Michael Noonan, good morning. The question is, can you negotiate a better deal if that's what they're saying in the European Central Bank?
Well, Jean-Paul Trichet was negotiating himself when he replied to that particular question, and he's quoted differently in different papers why he's urging that Ireland sticks to the plan. And of course I agree with him that Ireland should stick to the targets in the plan, because any departure from the targets in the plan, that's 3% by 2014, an adjustment overall of 15 billion. That's not renegotiable, and we all know that. So, that's the first thing, and I agree with that. But I say he's negotiating himself as well, because there's a very important meeting occurring in Brussels today, and we know that the debate has moved on now, not about Ireland, but the protection of the Eurozone, and the main European leaders are set to take major decisions. And it's within that context that the negotiation is taking place or could take place.
Now, you said about the targets, and we all know they have to be adhered to. Well, Sinn Féin don't go along with that. Labour wants slippage in that regard. So you're not all singing from the same hymn sheet.
No, we're not, but we're a separate party fighting a separate campaign. We're setting it out as we see it. In my view, it's not possible to renegotiate the targets, and I'm not going down that road.
In terms of the other things that you might renegotiate, then what are you saying? Because the individual interest rates that in the components, the EU part was negotiated by all the countries, including ourselves, before it applied to us. The IMF the same. We were one of the countries that agreed to the terms that the IMF use. So how can you get them to change unilaterally just for little old Ireland?
Now, it falls into two areas then. First of all, there's the bailout fund from Ireland. We can draw down funds, which we need, on certain conditions. And the conditions are in this memorandum of understanding. The first thing is, it's a bilateral agreement. It's not a legal contract. So
what's the difference?
Well, if it was an illegal contract, we'd have to get into all sorts of twists and turns to get any change in it, because it's a bilateral agreement. The people who drew it up can change it if they agree. And the IMF representative who came to Ireland, Mr. Chopra, and Ollie Rehn, who was the commissioner who visited us, have both told a group of Fine Gael people, including myself, that they have no difficulty in renegotiating the conditions on the basis that an item we don't like would be exchanged for an item which has an equal effect on the deficit. In other words,
you're saying that the manner of taxation or cutting or whatever, that can be changed. But what about the core thing that would really save us money, and that's a change in the interest rate?
Yes, that's the big issue then. So, if we leave out the conditions, we've established now that they're renegotiable, those conditions. The big ticket items.
No, but don't forget that if you do that, if you're cutting, well, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, who you're not taxing. I mean, there's got to be suffering one way or the other, and the same amount of suffering. It's just tinkering with who suffers.
Well, it's not tinkering. For example, we don't think the change in the minimum wage is justified. Now, first of all, it costs the Exchequer nothing because it's employers that are paying it, and we have a different view of that. We think that's negotiable. We think that on a much grander scale or a bigger issue, we think that the decision now to transfer all the assets out of the banking system from 20 million down to 5, we think that's a very bad idea, and we think the banks should be allowed hold those inhibited debts themselves and to work them out. But on the big ticket items,
it means you don't really trust NAMA.
Well, NAMA isn't working, Pat. And we could talk about NAMA for the rest of the programme, but
will you attempt to somehow dismantle NAMA the same way you're talking about the HSE?
No, I don't think we can dismantle it, because, as I said previously, how do you unscramble an egg? But they have taken over so many assets now. But their approach has to be changed.
Are they competent?
I think that they don't have an awful lot of property management expertise in there, so they need extra expertise. But I want to get back to your primary question about, is it possible to renegotiate the interest rate, and is it possible to have burden sharing? That's what's going on today in Brussels. And one of my big problems is we're not going to be represented at political level. These things are going to come to a head at the March summit. And what's happening is that the whole interventionist policies of the European Union to protect the euro are going to be changed.
But there's nothing you can do about that because of the date of the election.
Very well now. The first thing they have decided already, and we know this for a fact, is to expand the bailout fund. As well as expanding the bailout fund, they're going to give it additional functions. Christine Lagarde, the French finance minister, the night Enda Kenny and myself were in Brussels with President Barroso, issued a statement saying that from the French point of view, what they wanted was the bailout fund extended and money provided to the likes of the NTMA in countries that required it across Europe, so that they could go into the secondary market and they could buy the debt at discount.
But
it's available at 80%.
You can't cherry-pick from what the French want, because the French also want a minimum corporation tax rate all across Europe. That's another of their demands.
But do you realise that for companies that employ more than 2,000 people in France, the corporate tax rate is 13%? Do you realise that what they pay in France, what companies pay in France on average, is 8%? So the French have big headline. They have a 30% headline charge, but nobody pays that. So there's plenty of room for negotiation. The other thing the French have announced this morning, and it's in the Financial Times, is that they're going to go down the German road, which I suggested we'd consider, and put in a constitutional amendment to prevent them running deficits. That's from a country that haven't run a budget surplus since 1974.
Bottom line here is you think that there is movement in Europe, but it will have to be multilateral movement, not simply bilateral.
That's my position, and I've said it several times, and people who are rubbishing what Fine Gael are saying, oh, there's no way to get a bilateral renegotiation of the big issues. And that's true. And the bottom line is, we want to make the bailout fund more affordable. Now, if we can get that by lowering interest rates, if we can get it by alternative mechanisms like buying back debt cheaper, or if we can get it by burden sharing, which is on the agenda all the time.
That really means burning the bondholders in some shape or form. In other words, by multilateral agreement, they say that under certain conditions, senior bondholders will have to accept 80 cent in the euro or 60 cent in the euro.
I'll tell you what's happening at the minute. Senior bondholders in the banks in Ireland, the people who lent in France and Germany, have sold on that debt at a discount of 80%.
So we don't have to worry about these guys upon whom we will be depending in the future. You're saying it's the sharks out in the secondary market that we will be burning if we burn them?
But if you let me finish the point, they're buying stuff at 80 cents on the euro. That means that they're positioned to take a 25% capital gains if Ireland is forced to redeem at par. Now, all the arguments were valid a year ago, because if there was a renegotiation in Ireland, it would affect the German and French banks. That's no longer true, and the whole thing is shifting. But it's within the context of what's happening today and what's going to happen at the end of March that a settlement can be made.
Just two things. You're saying that the big boys have bailed out on Ireland anyway, so we're not going to affect them. The second thing, is our corporation tax rate absolutely sacrosanct as far as you're concerned?
At present, but there are people in Europe. There are people in Europe who are always running this agenda.
I mean, from your point of view, I'm asking you, are you going to defend it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
you're not going to concede any time, anywhere, any place, any movement on our corporation tax.
There is no divergence across the parties in the Dáil. The only people who broke ranks were Sinn Féin, and when we put down a motion before Christmas on the 12.5%, Arthur Morgan brought Sinn Féin in line. So every party is absolutely committed. It's a fundamental principle. It's key to our economic development and key to our package of attractions for inward investment.
Moving on to the campaign itself, and Brian Lennon said yesterday that your description of yourselves as a low-tax party, that your tax plans basically are bogus. He criticised the fact that you want to raise VAT in advance of where they wanted to do it. They wanted to do it much later in the 4-year plan. You want to do it next year. He said wait and try and harmonise with Britain. He also talked about the ratio of tax to spending cuts, that you had to shift that, and you're now going to tax a little bit more than you intended.
Brian Lennon is a pretty sad figure in this campaign. Rather than putting forward anything positive, he's very negative and he's attacking the opposition. He's trying to disguise the fact that his banking policy over 2 years was an absolute fiasco, and that he was the Minister for Finance when we lost our sovereignty and when the IMF came in. Now, to get back to the charges he's making, Brian Lennon brought in a budget that made corrections of 6 billion out of the 15, so we're down to 9. Because he did it with a combination of tax and savings, and because he's chose specific policy options, we had to revisit our own arithmetic. And we said that it would be 3 parts savings to 1 part tax. We've revisited it. The position is now we'll be adjusting over the next 3 budgets by 72% savings, 28% tax increases.
You're moving closer to the Labour Party.
Well, we're not. You see, Labour are off the page because, I heard a report in RTE the other night that we were moving closer to the Labour Party because they were 2-1. They're not. 50-50 is 1-1. 50-50 is 1-1. We're about 2.6, 2.7 to 1.
Now, what about the thing that's crippling people at the moment? And we know the logic of it. It was to bring more people into the tax net. That's the universal social charge. Well, Lennon says you're not going to reverse that when you get into government.
We're publishing our fiscal plans next week, not today. We're doing the banking today. Now, in advance of the fiscal plans, we've looked at certain options to take the hard edge that's cutting very hard for low-pay people on the universal social charge, and we have sent proposals to the Department of Finance to be costed.
Do you agree, though, with Mr. Lennon in principle that everybody should contribute a little if they're poor and a lot if they're rich to taxation? That there should be nobody who doesn't pay a bit of tax?
Yeah, in general terms, but there's some very poor people who should be exempt. But yes, and extending the tax net to lower paid people, we mightn't like doing it, but it's pretty well inevitable. But he only delivered on half of what he's saying. He didn't really deliver on removing the tax breaks for the very wealthy. And that's where the scope still is. Tax breaks can be removed, and the pressure on low paid people can be paid. But you can continue with the kind of situation we have in Ireland if 40% of people never pay any tax, direct tax.
Now, this morning you have just released your banking policies. What different are you going to do?
Well, there's an awful lot in it, first of all. I suppose the things that people will be more interested in is we have proposals on people who find it very hard to pay their mortgages. The negative equity generation.
How are you going to cope with those?
Well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to change the way tax breaks are applied on mortgages. For those who got out the very big mortgages between 2004 to 2008, we're going to extend the tax break. It would be worth about 900 euros to a couple on a 300,000 mortgage.
Now that means that's tax foregone on the government's part. Where will you retrieve the tax from? What other sector?
We're going to pay for that by drastically reducing the tax break on people who will buy houses from now on, because they're buying at the very bottom of the market. They're getting great value, and they really don't need to be encouraged through the income tax system. It's a very, very simple thing. We're doing something else as well. Do you know that public servants since 2008 on average have had their pay reduced by 14%, and the banks, the public servants didn't cause the problem. People who work in the banks have had their pay increase since 2008, increased by 3%.
So what are you going to do?
By 3%. We're going to say, as soon as we go into government, to every bank that's covered by guarantee, we want you to bring forward proposals on how you cut your costs. And we want you to cut your costs so that you'll be able to reduce the variable rate charged on mortgages by 0.25%. That's what we're going to say.
And that will affect what people pay every month for mortgage. What are the other headlines from your banking policy?
The other headlines in the banking policy is we'll wind down Anglo-Irish completely, we'll wind down Irish Nationwide completely, we'll make Bank of Ireland the primary Irish bank, we'll make it clear that we're available to sell AIB to a significant foreign bank, so that
there's competition in the market.
And the other thing is, there are very interesting proposals about the educational building society. There's a group in from the United States. The gentleman who bailed out Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac is one of the directors. President Sarkozy's brother is another. I've seen their proposals, very advanced. They're the preferred purchaser now, and they're in final negotiations with the NTMA. And they want, as well as offering mortgages, to be a third banking force that would offer facilities to small businesses.
But that's happening. That's not necessarily a Fine Gael policy.
No,
that's just happening.
No, but
it doesn't require a government to say so.
Well, first of all, it does, because the government will make the decision of who it's going to be sold to, because it's one
surely
of
it's the best price and the best bid.
Well, it's also the best. What are they going to do with it? The best price and the best bid is no good if it's some vulture arrives in. We want somebody who will provide a proper banking service. But the significance of it is, if they do what they're saying that they will do, we don't need to invest on a state bank then, because with God we have enough of state banks, and what we need to do is get a proper banking system which gets people back to work again by providing capital to business.
All right, finally, Michael Noonan, I should ask you about the status of the television debates. Has your party come to a decision as to where Enda Kenny will appear and with whom?
I'm not in that end of the party, but I know negotiations are going on with yourselves and with TV3.
It would appear to be an appalling vista that people would have to tune into Sky News to see a debate with Enda Kenny rather than to their own national station.
There's always a row about debates. When I was leader of the party, I wanted 3 debates. Bertie Ahern wanted 1 in the very last days of the campaign. RTE rolled over and gave Bertie his way, so there was no debate. This time we're going to have a debate, and there'll be a series of debates, and Fine Gael have no problem with that.
And what about that 3-way debate which Enda Kenny seemed to walk? I mean, if it were you, would you take on Eamon Gilmore and Micheál Martin?
Look, I'm not negotiating the terms of
But if it were you, would you?
I think you'll have to watch that space, but I don't think in the end of the day there'll be a problem, and I think all the issues will be well debated, and I think everybody will be reasonably happy with the outcome from what I hear at present.
I take it then your answer, I have to infer your answer is yes, that you'd have no problem debating with Eamon Gilmore.
My answer is I'm too busy doing the financial stuff, and I'm not quite sure what I'm deciding on the debates.
Michael Noonan for Fine Gael Finance Spokesman, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks very much, Pat.